It's not too often that a game from the Chinese market actually makes it over here to any fanfare, and it's even rarer that it does so in such good form. Bladed Fury wears its heritage on its sleeve, fully voiced in Chinese and filled to the brim with the mythology and aesthetic sensibilities of its home country. And the result is a slick, highly stylized hack-and-slash game that probably feels far more unique here in the West than in Next Studio's home country. As always, I'm Alex, and this is First 5, where I ask if games are worth your time, not your money. I played a game for 5 hours, and I'm gonna tell you if those were 5 hours well spent. And today we're on a quest for vengeance in Bladed Fury. Considering the circumstances, one might expect Bladed Fury to arrive on our shores as a slapdash translation turned around as quickly and cheaply as possible to see if the publisher can make a few extra bucks off the 10 people paying attention to it. But this actually isn't the case. On the contrary, the game actually seems to have attracted a cult following, no doubt thanks to the parallels it's drawing with an older title, Muramasa, and as best as I can tell, the Western market is actually its primary focus. You can feel the passion that went into every part of this game, its translation for a Western audience included, and aside from a few typos, the game translates over with only very minor issues, something that feels like more of an accomplishment than it probably should. There are two things Bladed Fury does really well. One is the game's aforementioned aesthetic, which features gorgeous art, audio, and, as best as I can tell without understanding a word of Chinese, solid voice acting performances. The other is its extremely polished combat. There's admittedly nothing particularly revolutionary here, as far as side-scrolling hack-and-slashes go. You've got a small sword, what hits things really fast, a big sword, what hits things really hard, a parry and a dodge for defensive options, and a few special abilities you can whip out in a pinch. But it's extremely responsive, well-polished, and generally a blast to play. This is an example of something doing the basics well enough that it can get away with not having to innovate. But it's the enemy design that really makes the combat come together and tick. Normally, I find things like armored enemies that lock down half your options more irritating than fun, but in this case, they work to great effect. Without them, it would be a simple matter to just mash one button through the entire game, but things like super armor and attacks that break through your block force you to explore the entire combat system to succeed, especially in later levels where enemy packs can feature the full gamut of mechanics in a single room, and each opponent needs to be juggled and individually handled a different way. Bosses, on the other hand, absolutely ooze with cool, but could have stood to have a little more variety in the mechanical department. Each boss has their own little unique flourishes, but with the exception of 3 of the 12 bosses that break the pattern, the standard tactic for a boss fight is to just mash your light attack and reflexively dodge through the boss the second they wind up a punch of their own. Ultimately, however, the game was short enough that I didn't realize this until the very end, and I still had a blast playing through it. If there is one criticism I can level at Bladed Fury, however, it's about its story. A tale of vengeance set in ancient China's warring states period that has serious difficulties balancing its priorities correctly. Filled with pointless conversational dead ends and characters that do nothing to forward the plot, Bladed Fury wastes almost all of its time exploring side stories that spin their wheels and never go anywhere, and in the process doesn't leave enough space left to focus on and develop the actual plot. And the result is that the main narrative glosses over so many story beats that it's difficult to follow anything more than its most basic plot points. This is a game that's willing to take 5 minutes to introduce a new character for the sole purpose of having them give a single hint for a puzzle, but then goes and truncates some of its most pivotal scenes and character motivations into a single sentence of exposition. I'm more than used to reviewing games with nothing narratives, but this is almost offensively bad storytelling. Bladed Fury's story issues are compounded by the fact that the game seems to assume a knowledge of Chinese culture as well. The entire story is wrapped up in a lot of Chinese mythology, much of which I imagine is probably common knowledge over there, but is definitely not here. You probably don't have to explain the full backstory about who the Flame Emperor or Hou Yi are to someone in China, just like how everyone here knows who Ares or Zeus are. So Bladed Fury normally wouldn't have to bog the game down with that exposition. But for a Western audience that lacks that context, you lose out on a lot of what's going on or why the presence of these mythological figures is important or symbolizes. It's not really something I would dock points for, and honestly the story is already such a total loss that this barely registers in comparison, but it is an interesting point of note about how things can get lost in translation, and it's the one chink I could find in what's otherwise an almost perfect translation of a game for a foreign market. So with all that, what do you get out of 5 hours with Bladed Fury? That time's more than enough to see the ending and give you time to spare to tackle the game's boss rush mode or start a second run on hard. And while the story was nothing but a jumbled mess, I still thoroughly enjoyed everything else about the game, enough so that I'd recommend it for a fun afternoon. As far as side-scrolling hack and slashers go, Bladed Fury feels a little safe and orthodox, but it's polished and well executed, and its Chinese aesthetic and gorgeous art put it over the top. If you like side-scrolling beat-em-ups, hack and slashes, or just want a good action game fix in general, you could do far worse than Bladed Fury. It has its missteps, but it does everything right where it counts. Hey, I hope you enjoyed this first 5 review. If you did, maybe consider hitting the subscribe button. If you're looking for games that value your time and don't pad themselves, I'm your guy. And be sure to check out some of my other reviews or longer form content while you're here. But regardless, thanks for watching this far, and I'll see you all next week.